everyone, and welcome to the Payments Innovation Channel. Here at Seamless Asia 2021, my name is Kathleen as your host. I am delighted to introduce one of our gold sponsors, Verimatrix, joining with us on this session titled Shielding Your Mobile Fintech Application from Hackers and Malware, welcoming Christopher Ray, Senior Vice President of Sales for APAC of Verimatrix, and Akshath Goyal, Senior Manager for Business Development and Partnerships of Shopify. Over to you, Akshath and Christopher.
Thank you, Kathleen, and welcome to today's session. My name is Akshath, and I'll be your host for today. Just want to say a quick welcome to Chris. Chris, I'm sure the audience would love to learn more about you as well as Verimatrix.
Sure, thank you for that. So as mentioned before, I'm Christopher Ray, SVP of Sales for Asia Pacific and Head of Global Partnerships for Verimatrix. I've been with the company for about 17 years, having previously built and led our global operations team since we were a small startup, and now we're over 120 countries worldwide and across multiple verticals. We started off doing content security for Hollywood pictures and TV streaming, but now we've got a set of technologies that allow us to move into the banking, fintech, and e-commerce industries. And I'm really excited about being able to showcase those here at the Seamless Asia Conference for customers throughout Asia Pacific.
Excellent. And so, Chris, the goal of today's chat really is to sort of learn more about the importance of securing mobile applications, especially, like you said, in the financial services space. Before we start diving, just a quick housekeeping note: we are taking questions. The session is meant to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them at Swap Card, and we'll get Chris to answer them. So Chris, let's start with the basics. Help me understand what exactly is application shielding and why is it so important?
Sure, great question. So applications can be reverse engineered and decompiled from their binary executable. So what that means is that people can see the original source code or something very close to what the original source code was that allow them to understand how your application works. So this may also be include being able to see how the new functionality is implemented. They might be able to see how to access parts of your backend network. There may be also parts where they can steal private keys or API keys or other secrets that you may have embedded into your application, as well as compromising algorithms. So really it's the keys to the castle. If they can unravel this application and take a look at it, they can see how your whole operation works. So application shielding is a set of techniques and technologies to protect against applications from being reverse engineered in the first place. This includes a combination of obfuscating the source code, so making it jumbled so that it's very difficult to read, also applying encryption to it, performing environmental checks on the device. So for example, on a mobile app, whether or not the iOS or Android app has been jailbroken or is a rooted device, whether it's using the current version of the operating system or something that's been kind of cobbled together. Additionally, applying redundant anti-tampering checks to ensure that there's no single countermeasure that can be compromised. So think of this as sort of a network of checks that are all checking in on each other to make sure that no single one of those has been violated. So we have technologies that will also take the private keys that may exist within the app and dissolve them into source code so that it cannot be extracted by the attacker. These technologies can then be automated as part of any software CI/CD pipeline so that they're always available and applied to every build that goes out. And that's a critical bit of hygiene. Security isn't just a single one-time event. This has to be done on every single build that's going out that you're then delivering to the App Store. Additionally, because you're applying security precautions, it's critical that you're not slowing down the application or the device with unnecessary overhead. So as we apply code optimization to this as well, to make sure that the final application is smaller and is running securely without any sort of trade-off to performance. So really the takeaway from what is application shielding is ultimately, we're not fixing any of the 0 days or bugs or security issues in the source code itself, but rather preventing them from being exposed as a potential source of vulnerability or compromise or theft of intellectual property.
Interesting. And so help me then understand, like, clearly the risks that you outlined are fairly high for any business, and especially gets even more highlighted when it's financial services and things like that. But how would someone know if their application is vulnerable? Like, how does like if I have a mobile application, how do I sort of diagnose whether my system's susceptible to something like reverse engineering or not? Like, what are the tools that are available to me?
Sure. So the first answer is anybody can get the tools to be able to reverse engineer an application. The techniques to reverse engineer are very technical, but there's a plethora of tools which have sort of commoditized and democratized hacking to make it more available to more people. So you can go onto a website like GitHub and download free tools to be able to reverse engineer applications on Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, JavaScript, etc. And these tools are being made simpler for people to use. There's also tutorials on YouTube that allow anybody to follow along and figure out how to reverse engineer the applications and what to look for when studying that source code logic. When you start to add the ability to automate this, now you can have you don't have to spend all of your time focused on one single target. You can now have this attacking multiple apps in parallel. And so that's what some of these hacker groups are starting to do is use these tools, get them into the hands of more people, and then be able to automate these attacks. So to answer the other question that you had about how could you verify whether or not your app is vulnerable or not, the most straightforward way is to go through a security audit firm, and they will do an analysis of your application to identify where the vulnerabilities might exist. But that, again, is not just a single time event. You need to do that on a regular basis to make sure that as each build is being put together, that there's not new vulnerabilities that are being created. And sometimes those vulnerabilities get introduced by something in the operating system or something that is a shared library that maybe you or one of your dependencies is updating as part of the new build. On top of that, as a sales tactic, we also offer free analysis of applications that our customers put together. So that's a benefit for us to be able to go in and show what the things that we say are the most meaningful things to apply security to and where to focus the attention.
Gotcha, interesting. And so essentially what I'm gathering out of this is like the traditional sort of tools that you had in your belt, such as network security and code obfuscation, aren't adequate enough in today's sort of scenario where we are. So again, help me explain like how and what really is at stake when somebody does reverse engineer your app. Sure.
So let me answer the first part, which is about whether network security and code obfuscation is enough. Today, there are tools that are built into some of the software development platforms that say that they'll obfuscate the code and make it difficult for people to be able to look at what the source code is if they were to reverse engineer it. The challenge is that we can still pull that back out and still see what the logic is. So by itself, code obfuscation is not a solution unto itself. It's not a standalone solution. Network security is great for handling the backend network, but you also have this attack surface, which is now in everybody's pocket, being on their mobile phone. And so the short answer is no. That security is about reducing the overall attack surface, meaning reducing the points in which an attacker could break through. And an app itself is a trusted endpoint that's allowed to connect to the backend network through various APIs and protocols. So by reverse engineering the app from the App Store, I can now see the logic and functionality for how your application works and get insight onto how to penetrate that network backend as well, or maybe even spoof another user. So the obfuscation can still be reversed, and a savvy hacker can still walk through that logic to understand what's going on. That's why you need to have all these other techniques applied at the same time to make sure that nobody can attach a debugger or something like that to be able to start doing that analysis. So at the end of the day, there's three primary types of risks that you'd be looking at. The most obvious one is financial risk, and you've got operational risk and data risk. Financial risk, theft of money or even loss of revenue. If somebody's disrupting. In the media space, for example, we have hackers that are constantly trying to remove ads from streaming services. So that impacts the end user. And certainly if you've got opportunities and promotions going on through different financial apps, there could be a loss of revenues there as well. Operational risk would be more like a denial of service attack or an impact to a specific functionality. And then included in the data risk is both not only PII data about the user, but potentially even intellectual property that the attackers can see how your software is built and then how to compromise it. So sometimes developers will put something into the code called a feature flag, which allows them to selectively enable or disable functionality to a segment of users. So if the application is reverse engineered, this may also allow hackers to discover future functionality that you haven't publicly released yet, and that gives them a heads up to develop compromises before it's officially launched.
Ah, that's fascinating. I mean, a lot of what you're saying is always top of mind at any sort of fintech or financial company, especially with like what's going on in the news, like the recent hacks and data breaches at SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, and others. So, in your experience and since you're the expert on this, what are some of the best practices that you're seeing companies adopt to sort of avoid these kind of situations? Because from my perspective, like it seems like the hackers are always kind of one step ahead. And it's really just a cat and mouse game where like companies are trying to catch up, hackers are finding more and more innovative ways. So what are the general trends, and then what are the best practices that companies are sort of employing to get ahead of this?
Yeah, great question. So I think right now you're seeing ransomware as being perceived as the biggest threat out there right now, because it's a combination of somebody hacking into your network and then locking up your applications or your files in such a way that you have to then pay a ransom, which may or may not actually net the results that you're looking for. Certainly in the Colonial Pipeline example, they paid the ransom. They were given a key, but then the software that was decrypting the files ran even slower than trying to restore from the backup. You may not even get the right key, or you may even get ransomware where there's multiple layers of it. So you pay for one layer and only to find out that it's still encrypted at another layer, and now you have to go out and pay for another key on top of that. So there's a lot of these kinds of things going on right now because the hackers know that they can get paid by the companies, or certainly by cybersecurity insurance companies who would pay out a amount of money in the event of a breach. On top of that, you've got companies like Bank of America. They're currently spending over $1 billion a year in cybersecurity, and most companies can't afford to do that. So really the way that most companies need to look at this is to take a risk-based approach to the prioritization of where they start protecting the app relative to the rest of the business. So if this is a small company and the app represents 100% of where revenue is going to be generated from, or financial transactions are going to happen, clearly that needs to be the focus. As you look at more established companies, they're going to have to figure out at what point does the application itself become a source of compromise that needs to be addressed. So, relative to what percentage of your users are going through the standard website versus what percentage of your users are going through the mobile application, and then what kind of data is available to somebody to compromise in those particular situations. So there's not one size fits all answer, but as you said, it is a cat and mouse situation where the security is constantly changing around that.
Interesting. Yeah, you touched on an important point here that, like, obviously, like, Bank of America can afford $1 billion to prevent something like this. Like, thinking about like what we at Shopify are trying to do, which make like commerce easier for our merchants and essentially allow every mom and pop to open their own store and like essentially digitize commerce.
Right.
How with bulk of now commerce sort of moving on your mobile phones through mobile applications, how does somebody like a average Joe just starting out think about mobile application security? How do they figure out like what the appropriate budget is, and like what are some of the decisions or sort of key factors that they need to consider in this?
Sure. So as if you're a small company and you're looking to get your first mobile app out, or you're having to piggyback on somebody else's platform, probably the most important thing is to ask certain questions as part of your RFI process to vet out the vendors that you're reviewing. Because so much of the world today is interconnected through APIs, SDKs, and web services that, it's upon each business to be able to ask the tough questions to their vendors about whether they comply when it comes to mobile applications. We actually end up having a free ebook on our website that helps guide people through what are the questions that you should be asking in this particular process. So I recommend that anybody interested in this can go there. But effectively, when you're small, you need to leverage on a platform that already exists and ask questions such as, Are you providing application security for Android and iOS to keep them from being reverse engineered? If so, how? What are the mechanisms? Are you providing or are you supporting new versions of the Android and iOS operating systems before they're publicly available? And if so, what is your release cadence? Is your tool set available to run on-premise, or does it run in the cloud? And if it does run in the cloud, how do I weave that into my software development pipeline for CI/CD workflows? What are the core functions that are different than competitors? How do you apply protection without having to do any code changes? And that's also very critical for companies that may not have this experience and discipline built into their culture yet. Is how do I automate this in such a way that's going to reduce the likelihood of human error? And ultimately, at the end, you also want to ask how long is it going to take to deploy this, and give us some reference customers that this solution is being used on today that will help provide a better set of social proofs in terms of what types of industries and what types of companies are already using this technology in production.
Excellent. Those are very helpful tips. At this point, I just want to remind the audience that we are taking questions. So feel free to drop those questions in, and we'll make sure Chris gets to them. Chris, let's now sort of pivot and kind of see how does, like, so far we've talked about how the importance of mobile security and how it's almost like a compliance issue at fintechs and banks and things like that. But what about, like, where is the business case for this? Like, besides the expense or the cost savings in terms of like ransomware, like how do you sort of position mobile application security, or the fact that you haven't had a data breach on your platform as a competitive advantage? Like, how does the company do that?
Yeah, I don't know that you want to position it as saying like we're unhackable, because on a long enough timeline, everything can and will be hacked. And it just depends on how much are you shrinking that blast radius, and where are you putting your resources to ensure that you've got the maximum ROI on your cybersecurity budget. So you could spend, Bank of America is spending $1 billion. I guarantee that the people inside Bank of America still want to spend $2 or $3 billion to get to what they really think needs to be achieved. So there's always going to be some resource constraints around that. And so, ultimately end customers, are concerned with data and privacy, and they want transparency and control. And so I think the first thing that you can do to try to turn this into a competitive advantage is to be very upfront about what you're doing. What's your cybersecurity policy? What's your breach protocol? Tell them what's going to happen in the event that the app is compromised or the backend network is compromised. This can be even, this is most applicable when you're dealing with somebody's money or PII data. If you're dealing with, just a casual game, people may not care as much. But if you're talking about, I just downloaded this new cryptocurrency app, what kind of trust do you have in the company behind it? Given that you may not know how cryptocurrency works, but you want to get involved in it, you need to be able to trust the company that's supplying this to you, in addition to the mechanism for doing the transactions. And so if you're a larger institution, you also need to preserve your reputation and carry over to the safety that people have felt with their money in your physical branches or websites to the mobile apps as well. And there's a saying that compliance alone is not security, but security can be compliance. So I think the takeaway here is that, rather than saying that you've got something that's hack proof, is really do a thorough analysis of where's the best place to spend the resources and spend the money on maximizing the ROI from what your customers are going to feel. Because there's always going to be one more thing that you need to do. It's a complicated onion, and you could go down a pretty deep rabbit hole trying to patch all the things in a particular supply chain.
Gotcha. You touched on an interesting point there about like the awareness sort of amongst customers now increasing, and like customers are now asking, hey, how are you using my data? Where is it going in? So is that a trend that you're seeing is kind of on the rise? Like what are some of the things that's top of the mind for a customer that kind of engages with these kind of applications?
Sure. I think the recent data breaches that we've seen in the headlines have been one form of bringing awareness to the situation. If you hear suddenly that WhatsApp has been hacked and that people can read your messages, that's a very personal data breach versus, let's say, a big corporation where you don't care about whether or not their corporate records were stolen. So I think the prevalence of these large systems having these huge attack surfaces has brought more attention to the public. On top of that, you've got GDPR, which I think has also reinforced to a lot of companies that didn't think that they had to deal with this type of thing, that the data itself is not limited to physical location, that if you are a member of the European Union, that compliance needs to apply to any system that that a user from that territory would apply to. So, you coming over here and watching something on Netflix, or you buying something on Amazon, now all of a sudden these systems have to be able to support that. And so that's also raised the awareness. And then lastly, I think that, as companies like Apple, for example, are retooling their branding around being known for privacy, that's shining a light on, well, wait a second. So if you're saying that Apple is the most secure platform, then what does that say about Android? And so I think that kind of branding and marketing from major tech companies is also helping to raise the awareness. And so over time, we're going to see more things play out, certainly in Congress and through legislation. But I think right now we're certainly at a point where the average consumer is starting to wonder, what are these companies doing with my data, and what will happen if there's a breach? What information is going to be made available?
Yeah, it's that saying, right? Like if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And so it's interesting that you mentioned sort of some of the congressional hearings, and now Apple retooling itself and branding itself as the most private or secure tool. How much of this is being driven like from a regulatory perspective versus, let's say, a consumer demand? Like, is it still coming from the top, or are you seeing this bubble up from like consumers asking more questions, the consumers sort of putting more emphasis on security?
I think it's coming from both sides. So as you've seen from the most recent iOS update, Apple certainly pushes the ability to choose to opt in for whether or not you're being tracked across multiple apps. And so that kind of awareness is being brought literally every time that you open up a new app or download a new app. You're being asked, what would you like to have done with your data? Do you want to be tracked across multiple apps and multiple websites? So I think over the last year or so, that has become a much more consumer-driven thing, and consumers therefore ask their governments, let's put some laws into place. Let's come up with some policies that help protect the average consumer from having their data misused, or at least some consequences to what happens if companies can't provide this adequate protection. And certainly in the US right now, Biden has just introduced a new bill or a new executive order, which is going to set rules and policies around what happens when there is a data breach and who that applies to. And I think this is going to be the first of many in the future. Certainly as we start to get into discussions about whether or not tech companies are too big, that will certainly be a key issue at the center of all this.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's regulatorily driven, which means like companies, like it's the law, and so you're going to see compliance sort of expenses go up as companies sort of pivot to adhere to these new rules and regulations. I know when GDPR was there, and one of the big things was that having that kill switch to sort of forget all your data or erase all of your data, and like a lot of companies had to like kind of retool and build out all of these new products. So again, like if you're putting yourself in the place of a CSO or like a chief technology officer at one of these companies, how do you sort of pivot or position your company to make sure that what are the steps that they can take proactively to kind of sort of be in line when these regulations eventually become the law?
Sure. I think maybe counterintuitively, it's sometimes easier to apply security at the very beginning and have that be part of the design of any product or service that's being released. Because you start to build that discipline early on, and then you don't have as much technical debt to overcome at a later point. Certainly if you've got an app or a service that's been running for a period of time and you have to go back through and rewire how do I make this work for the GDPR example that you just brought up, that becomes much more challenging. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but each company, each market, each application, they're going to have to be, they are unique, and they're going to have to look at, how does each new build introduce new challenges. In some situations, the app might be the entire interface and customer experience, in which case app security has to be the top priority. In other situations, the app might have a very small audience and have less value to a hacker. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have, or it shouldn't have security applied to it, but it may not be the primary focus of that particular budget, or at least that year's budget. But you still have to look at that as being a trusted endpoint into the back end of your network, or at least integrated into APIs from other vendors. So that needs to at least be top of mind and be part of the argument about why should we get budget this year for app shielding when we have all these other things. It really depends on what that business is and how much of that business is being done on the mobile application.
Right, that's fair. I just want to be cognizant of time. So just a quick reminder again that Chris is taking questions. So if you have any, just please drop them in the channel. As we sort of come towards the end of this chat, tell me what would be the one last thing you'd like people to walk away from this session to know? Like what's the bottom line here, Chris?
I think main takeaway is that security is like an onion. There's many layers to it, and they're constantly changing, and there's never going to be a such thing as a completely secure, unhackable system. There's never going to be a one-size-fits-all answer for how to prioritize your budget. However, the business and sensitive information that you're doing through your app, you need to have that protected from being a compromised, trusted endpoint into your back end. So regardless of size of company, it's our recommendation to go with a third-party vendor who has a proven solution to leverage their expertise and experience. And it's our job as a vendor to make that security as frictionless and cost-effective as possible for our customers, so they can build that discipline in early, or really at any stage of their company's growth.
Great, perfect. That's helpful. And so, as you as vendors, then what are some of the, like, how does a project kind of work? Do you consult first, then implement? Like, walk me through what if somebody was to hire Verimatrix for a project, like what's a typical project in this space that looks like?
Sure. So if you actually go to our website today, we have a form that you can fill out where you can apply to have a free security evaluation of your mobile application. We can do that for Android or iOS. Our technology is also applied to Windows, Mac, Linux, JavaScript, etc. But for this particular free thing, we can do this evaluation, and our teams will, with your permission, download the app and do an analysis of it to identify, what are the things that we know that should be addressed, and then from there we'll provide that report back to the customer for them to evaluate and then make a decision about whether or not they want to move forward. If they do, we also offer a free 30-day trial of our software where you can actually do a drag and drop into a browser window, upload it, it gets protected. 15 minutes later, you get back a protected binary that you can then upload that IPA or APK file to the app stores and be able to start using it almost immediately. So that's really kind of the first engagement that we would have, is to do the security audit with them, or not audit, but a evaluation of their app, and then encourage them to start playing with our 30-day free trial online. And then from there, we can have the discussions about whether it makes sense for them to look at the on-premise tools, which provide more control and more customizations around performance enhancements.
Right, and is this approach for like all platforms of all sizes, or is like does it vary with the size of the application, the users, and things like that?
Nope, this can apply to anything. Right now we're focusing on the fintech market. We've got one of the largest banks in the world as one of our customers, who's applying it to multiple applications that they have. We've also been applying this to the healthcare space, to gaming, to automotive. So we've got a lot of applications where the use case is interesting information that should definitely be protected and shielded, and ensure that those applications can't be reverse engineered.
Oh, wow, that's excellent. Well, we're almost at time, so thank you, Chris, for your time and sharing your thoughts today. It's really been an insightful conversation. And once again, if you have any further questions or would like to connect with Chris or myself, please use the Seamless Swap Card platform. Big thank you to everyone for joining in today. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Great. Thanks a lot,
Thank
guys.
you, Akshath. Yeah, thank you, Christopher. So here, for our audience who still have questions, you can connect with Akshath and Christopher directly in this platform. Also, kindly do take time to visit the virtual exhibition area today, where you can see our sponsors' products and services. Thank you all, and see you in our next session.
One last thing, we have a video that shows how you can hack an Android application in 15 minutes or less. That's available in our portal on the Seamless platform as well for you to go take a look at. Enjoy.
Wonderful. Yes,
Wow.
thank you. All right, bye.
Thanks. Bye.